I heard the people, and the people want me to rank John Mayer's albums, and we're going to do just that today. Here's how we're going to do this. I have 3 categories that I'm going to score each album in out of 10, and we're going to total the scores up at the end and see what we get. So the 3 categories are production and recording, songwriting, and performances. Click that like button if you like what I'm doing, as all YouTubers say. Leave a comment. If you really like what I'm doing, subscribe. And if you really, really like what I'm doing, check out all of the links in the description below, which will take you to my website, my social media, my Spotify, Apple Music, and many of the other covers and videos I have here on YouTube that I would love for you to check out. But without further ado, let's get to it. So, Room for Squares. Here are the scores that I gave it. Production, recording, I gave it a 7. John Alasia produced this album, and he is a name that is attached to many of your favorite early 2000s, late 90s singer-songwriters. Check out his Wikipedia page. You'll recognize pretty much every name of who he's produced. And he does a great job. I gave it a 7 because compared to some of John Mayer's later albums, there's not a lot of variance in the different tones and textures that are used. They kind of found what worked as far as a drum sound, as far as an acoustic guitar sound, as far as an electric guitar sound, and they went with it and kind of applied it to almost every song on the record. Great songs, as we get to in a minute, but I think there are definitely other records where the textures are more interesting and varied. Songwriting, 10 out of 10 on this one. I don't have to tell you that some of the most cleverly written lyrics that he has put out are on this record. They're highly relatable, especially for people who were in their early 20s, late teens at the time. So the songwriting is off the charts on this one. Performances. For a first album, I gave it a 9. You know, as a relatively inexperienced musician in the studio, John Mayer really showed that he knows what he's doing. A lot of the guitar parts, a lot of the arrangements were already in place when he brought everything to John Alasia, and that's a credit to John Mayer because many artists, myself included, I needed a lot of coaching from producers on how to shape what I was doing and how to take some ideas that were good but kind of raw and make them into something great. Now, John Mayer really had everything kind of 85% of the way there, so he made John Alasia's job really easy, in my opinion. Certainly John Alasia is great at what he does and put him over the edge as far as making a great record, but performances, I mean, really impressive for a relatively young musician. Next up, John Mayer's second album, Heavier Things, produced by Jack Joseph Puig. He was actually a mixing engineer on the previous record, Room for Squares, so he came back in a production role on this one. So here are my rankings for Heavier Things. Production and recording, I gave it a 6. A lot of these songs are really cool, and they're cool live, but on the record, I just felt like it was kind of flat. It sounded like the album cover looked to me, kind of gray. Now, you can criticize me for that if you want, but it's probably the least interesting sounding album to me. Songwriting, gave it a 7 on this one. Now, certainly, the song Daughters is arguably, it's hugely popular. How can I say that it's not a good song? It is a good song. There's plenty of good songs on this record. I do think that, the second album of any major recording artist is always very difficult, especially when the first one is extremely successful, as Room for Squares was. You have a lot to prove, and Mayer definitely proved that he could continue with a massive hit like Daughters, but the record itself, the album, I don't know. It kind of pales in comparison to Room for Squares for me. Performances. I gave it an 8. I mean, you're really not going to get a bad performance recorded by John Mayer, of course. The songs sort of push the performance level too, and being that I don't think that the songs are the most compelling on this record, the performances aren't necessarily the most compelling. However, he does open up a little bit with guitar playing on this. So you have the song Come Back to Bed, which was a really interesting song for him to solo over live at this point. He didn't have Gravity yet or Slow Dancing in a Burning Room. So when you went to a show, if you really wanted to see him kind of rip a guitar solo, this was a good one to do it on. And I certainly don't need to play any more than that for you to know that next up is Continuum. That's right. This record was produced by John Mayer himself and Steve Jordan, the drummer extraordinaire, as well as producer extraordinaire. Speaking of producing, production and recording, I'm giving this one a 9. It is phenomenal. You can hear John Mayer as a guitar player finally finding that recorded voice that sounds like him on this album. This is the point where when he plays, you know it's him. And that's a really cool thing for anybody who is a instrumentalist, if you can just simply play and have people recognize what you're doing and who you are as just the same as they would if you were singing, I think you really achieved something, and this album does that. It's recorded beautifully, it's recorded brilliantly, and that's certainly credit to both John Mayer and Steve Jordan being in the producer seat. Songwriting, I don't think anybody is going to be surprised by this, but it's a 10 out of 10. This album is, as far as songs go, I mean, it has some of the most, if you can call them iconic, John Mayer songs. Gravity, Slow Dancing in a Burning Room, Stop This Train, you name it. I mean, this thing front to back is just songwriting brilliance, and I don't have to tell you that. If you're here watching this video, you already know that. Performances, a 9, of course. As I said earlier, you're finally hearing John Mayer come into his own as a instrumentalist on record. Live, is a different story. He's been just amazing live his whole career and gotten only better as things have gone, but capturing that on an album in the right way is difficult to do, and it takes a lot of people a long time to do it. Sometimes you never get it, and you have bands that are just really known for being live acts, and they don't really have that magic in the studio. Well, Continuum certainly captures that magic. The performances, Pino Palladino, Steve Jordan on the drums, and the list goes on of amazing musicians who were on this record, but it is certainly the pinnacle in a lot of ways of recorded performance for John Mayer. Next up is Battle Studies. John Mayer, Steve Jordan, still in the producer seat on this one. For production and recording, I'm going to give it an 8. It's great. It's really, really good. Is it as magical as Continuum in this column, in this category? I don't know. Just one notch lower, I think, even though it's the same production team and a lot of the same musicians. Songwriting. Might be surprised on this one, but I'm giving it a 10 out of 10 on this. I love these songs. I think there's some really, really good songwriting on this album. Edge of Desire, Assassin, Friends, Lovers, or Nothing. I mean, there's some really, really, really good songs on here. And I think it gets overlooked sometimes. I've overlooked it. I've gone back and listened to it and really kind of surprised myself with how much I enjoy these songs. So 10 out of 10 for me. Performances. At this point in his career, I mean, he's really figured out how to record himself. Certainly being in the producer seat for himself, you now have that control over what you're doing, which is really cool. And I gave it a 9 out of 10. The performances on this record are every bit as good as Continuum, and were really, really great. Up next, Born and Raised. We've entered a new era here with John Mayer, and Don Was in the producer roles. This album, production and recording, I'm going to give it a 10. This thing is brilliantly recorded. It's brilliantly produced. The textures, the layers, the sounds that are on this thing are incredible. Just give it a listen, and you will absolutely hear that. It's varied. It's beautiful. It sounds sort of like the album cover looks. I mean, that's a really cool looking album cover. It's very interesting. There's a lot of depth, and there's a lot of depth on the production and recording of this record. Songwriting, 10 out of 10 again for me. I know I'm being a little bit John Mayer fanboyish here, but it's a 10 out of 10. I mean, things like Walt Grace, go check out that song if you haven't heard it. I mean, he has gone and kind of stretched the songwriting muscle in a new way on this album. It's a different approach, definitely more storytelling, definitely more Bob Dylan-ish, not necessarily in the delivery, but in the exploration of what you can do with different songs. Performances. I'm going to give this one an 8 out of 10. This is around the time where John Mayer had some vocal issues, and I don't think that necessarily affects my score for this, but he was actually limited physically by what he could sing. When you come from songs like Waiting on the World to Change, where he's kind of at the top of his register for the whole song, and it's really interesting, it's very exciting, his limitations definitely, I think, drove the songs and drove the sound of the album. Now, that's not to say they're bad performances. They're phenomenal performances. They're just not as exciting as I think they could have been, would it not have been for some of the vocal trouble he was having. However, we might not have gotten this record if he hadn't gone through the vocal issues. And I think this record is brilliant, and I think it is a really, really, really cool bright spot in his career. It's so different from anything he had done before. And like I said, we might not have gotten it had he not gone through the health issues that he was going through at that time. Production and recording on Paradise Valley, I gave it an 8. Again, it's Don Was, it's John Mayer. Same team as Born and Raised, but much like when you came from Continuum to Battle Studies, I think this one just lacks something a little bit in the production and the recording. Songwriting, gave this one a 7. It seems disjointed. It seems kind of unfinished in a lot of ways as an album, as a collection of songs. There are a couple really bright spots. Like I said, Dear Marie, a really cool song. Wildfire is a lot of fun. You can start to hear that Dead and Company type thing coming in to this album, which is cool. Yeah, but it just wasn't over the top for me on songwriting. Performances, again, songwriting kind of drives the performances. I gave this a 7. There's some interesting guitar parts, but not too many things to me that are memorable. So I gave it a 7 out of 10. The Search for Everything, John's latest studio album as of the recording of this video. In the production seat, you've got John Mayer again, you've got Chad Franskowiak, and you've got Steve Jordan back in the executive producer role for this. So we're trying to bring some of that Continuum magic back, I think. For production and recording, I'm going to be honest with you. I've heard a lot of criticisms of this album, but I happen to love it. I think it sounds incredible. I think it's produced beautifully. I think it's recorded beautifully, and I gave it a 9 out of 10. Songwriting. A lot of people think that it's disjointed. Maybe they're disappointed with the way it was released, but I'm giving it a 9 out of 10. There are so many songs in this record that I love, and I think they're varied too, which is kind of cool. You're starting to hear that he has a million different sort of directions that he's going with music. You've got the Dead and Company thing. You've got the singer-songwriter thing. You've got the blues guitar-driven thing. You've got him at the piano, and yes, that's a lot of different places to be musically, and you can hear that on the album, and for some people it might be off-putting. For me, I think it's great. I gave it a 9 out of 10 in the songwriting department. Performances, again, 9 out of 10. He's come into his own. You hear some amazing guitar work on this record being captured. You hear some really cool piano work being captured on this. Vocally, he's really back up, I think, to where he was prior to the vocal injury. Maybe even better in a lot of ways because he's learned how to use his voice in the right way. And I mean, it's stellar, 9 out of 10. So folks, where does that leave us? If you've been keeping score, you probably already know who won, but let's go to the list and see who won this thing. Coming in last place, Heavier Things, got a score of 21 out of 30 for me. Coming in 6th place, we've got Paradise Valley, score of 22 out of 30. Coming in 5th place, Room for Squares, a score of 26 out of 30. Coming in at both 3rd and 4th, we have a tie here. We've got Battle Studies and The Search for Everything, both getting a 27 out of 30 from me. Now, I think they're kind of interchangeable for me, but if I had to pick, I would put Battle Studies in 4th, Search for Everything in 3rd. The final two, here we are. We have another tie, receiving a score of both 28 out of 30. It's Born and Raised in Continuum. Now, I don't think it's any surprise that Continuum is hovering around the number 1 spot. I could have just made a video and just say Continuum's the number 1 album. I think pretty much everybody agrees that that's kind of the pinnacle. However, I'm going to make the argument that Born and Raised is right there with it. And I think my scoring is accurate on this. So they're really interchangeable for me. I don't know that I can pick one or the other. As an album, those are the two best. Now, it's up to you as to which one actually reigns king, but I think either one of them works when you look at his entire career, and if you're looking at the album as a whole. Now, I will say, just an asterisk here, if I was including live albums, Where the Light Is, that one wins. It's got John Mayer Trio, it's got the full band, and it's got him in the acoustic setting. You can't beat that. He's done a tour like that. If I had included that, that would have been number 1 for me, but I didn't. So there you have it, everybody. I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you stuck around to the end to see who won as far as John Mayer's albums. Thank you so much. Leave some comments. Leave your own list in the comments below. That would be great. I'd love to see what your rankings are of the 7 existing studio albums at this point, and we'll see you next time.